The widow found lies in the ranch ledger. Then the quiet cowboy revealed the truth. The first thing Ruth Bellamy noticed was not the blood-red sunset over the Colorado hills, nor the size of the ranch house, nor the men who stopped working when her wagon rolled into the yard. It was the silence. Not peaceful silence, not the soft kind that came before evening supper. This silence felt watched. It sat over Silver Creek Ranch like dust on a locked Bible, hiding something old, something ugly, something nobody wanted spoken aloud. And before Ruth had been on that land for one full hour, she understood one thing clearly. The books were not messy. They were hiding a crime. She stood in the ranch office with her travel case still beside her boots, her black widow's dress gray at the hem from the trail, and one gloved hand resting on a stack of ledgers that smelled of old ink and damp paper. Outside, a horse shifted against the hitching rail. Somewhere near the bunkhouse, a man coughed and went quiet. Across the desk, Elias Voss smiled like a man who had already decided she was too tired, too poor, and too female to be a problem. "You'll find the accounts need a gentle hand, Mrs. Bellamy," he said. "The last clerk left things in a state." Ruth looked down at the open page. A gentle hand. That was what men always asked for when they meant a blind eye. "I was hired to keep the books," she said, her voice calm, "not soothe them." Elias' smile held, but only at the mouth. His eyes cooled. He was a handsome man in the way polished knives were handsome. Clean coat, silver watch chain, smooth hair, boots too fine for the yard outside. Ranch manager he had called himself when he met her wagon. The man who handled wages, supplies, contracts, and all matters too complicated for the hands. Ruth had heard that kind of sentence before. She had heard it in a bank office in Denver after her husband died. She had heard it from a lawyer who told her loan papers were difficult for a grieving woman to understand. She had heard it from a county clerk who would not look at the figures she placed before him, because the man who cheated her had already shaken his hand. Her husband, Samuel Bellamy, had been buried 2 years now. A good man, a patient man, a man who believed written contracts meant what they said. That belief had cost him his cattle, his land, and finally the strength in his chest. Ruth had stood beside his grave without crying. Not because she was cold. Because if she had begun, she feared she would never stop. So she made a promise instead. No more trusting smiles. No more folded papers accepted without reading. No more letting a man call theft a misunderstanding. That promise had carried her through 2 years of rented rooms, late-night bookkeeping, unpaid wages, and meals stretched thin enough to see through. By the time she saw the notice for an accountant at Silver Creek Ranch outside the dry goods store in Abilene, she had $9, one spare dress, and Samuel's old pocket Bible tucked beneath her shirts. The ranch needed an experienced bookkeeper. Ruth needed work. So she came west in a supply wagon with dust in her hair, and a grief she kept folded away like a letter too painful to open. Now, standing in the ranch office, she saw the first crooked number before Elias Voss had finished explaining where the ink was kept. A shipment of fence wire listed twice. Salt blocks billed at 3 times the likely amount. Payroll columns corrected in a different hand. Small things, quiet things, the kind of things a careless person missed and a dishonest person counted on. Elias tapped the desk with one finger. "If you have questions, bring them to me first," he said. "The ranch hands mean well, but they don't understand business." Ruth turned one page slowly. Men who load freight usually know whether freight arrived. His smile thinned. "Mrs. Bellamy, this is a large operation. I only want to avoid confusion." "Then clear records will help us both." For the first time, Elias did not answer at once. The room held still. Then he laughed softly, as if she had said something charming instead of dangerous. "I believe you and I will work well together," he said. Ruth did not believe that for even 1 second. He left her there as the last light moved across the floorboards. She waited until his footsteps faded down the hall before she opened the bottom drawer of the desk and found it empty except for mouse dust and a broken pencil. Then she checked the cabinet behind her, then the shelf above the stove, then the locked tin box sitting openly on a side table as if daring her to notice it. By midnight, the office lantern had burned low. By midnight, Ruth had found 3 sets of numbers for the same month. By midnight, she knew the ranch had paid for more grain than its barns could hold, more lumber than its fences could use, and more wages than the men outside were likely receiving. She sat back, rubbing the ache from her fingers. The wind pressed against the window. The lantern flame leaned sideways. That was when she heard a soft knock at the open door. A man stood in the hall, holding a tin cup of coffee. He wore a faded brown coat, a sweat-darkened hat, and boots repaired so many times they looked like old promises. He was not young, but not old either. Late 30s, perhaps, lean from work, quiet in the shoulders, with sun-browned skin and gray eyes that did not rush over a person. "Didn't mean to startle you," he said. "You didn't." He stepped in just far enough to set the coffee on the edge of the desk. "Cook said you missed supper." "I was working." "I can see that." Most men would have looked at the papers. He did not. That made Ruth notice him more, not less. "What's your name?" she asked. "Jonah Reed." "Ranch hand." "That's what they call me." There was something careful in that answer. Not false exactly, just not complete. Ruth wrapped both hands around the coffee. It was bitter and hot, and for one tired moment it nearly broke through her guard. "Thank you, Mr. Reed." "Jonah is fine." He turned to leave, then stopped near the doorway. "If you're looking for older supply records," he said, "don't waste time in that cabinet. Try the feed shed, back wall, flour barrel with the cracked lid." Ruth looked up. Why would ranch records be in a flour barrel? Jonah's face stayed calm. "Because nobody checks flour when they're hiding paper." The lantern moved in the wind. Ruth stood very still. Outside, Silver Creek Ranch lay under a dark sky, quiet as a held breath. Elias Voss thought she was alone. He thought she was poor enough to frighten and tired enough to mislead. But at the edge of the doorway stood a quiet cowboy with patched boots, watchful eyes, and knowledge he should not have had. And for the first time since arriving, Ruth wondered whether Silver Creek Ranch was not only hiding a crime. Maybe it was also hiding the one man who could help her expose it. Ruth did not go to the feed shed that night. That would have been foolish, and grief had taught her the difference between courage and foolishness. Courage kept its head down until the right hour. Foolishness ran into the dark because fear had called it by name. So she thanked Jonah Reed with a small nod, watched him leave, and stayed in the office until the lantern nearly died. She copied ordinary figures onto an ordinary page, just in case anyone asked what had kept her so long. Then she closed the ledger, locked her own notes in the false pocket sewn inside her travel case, and went to the little room that had been given to her at the back of the main house. The room was plain, narrow bed, one chair, a washstand with a cracked blue bowl, a small window facing the yard. It was more than she had owned a month ago. Still, she did not sleep much. Every time the wind touched the shutters, she thought of Jonah's voice. "Try the feed shed, back wall, flour barrel with the cracked lid." Men did not know hiding places by accident, not unless they had used them, not unless they had been searching too. Just before dawn, Ruth rose, pinned her hair tight, and dressed in the same black gown she had worn the day before. It was faded at the elbows and too severe for ranch work, but it reminded men to keep their hands and jokes to themselves. She slipped Samuel's pocket Bible into her apron pocket, more from habit than faith, and stepped into the gray morning. Silver Creek Ranch was already awake. A boy was carrying water toward the cookhouse. 2 hands were saddling horses near the corral. Somewhere, a rooster screamed like he had been personally insulted by the sunrise. Ruth crossed the yard slowly, with a ledger under one arm, as if she had every right to be going wherever she pleased. The feed shed smelled of grain, old burlap, and warm dust. Light fell through cracks in the planks in thin golden stripes. She waited inside the doorway, listening. No footsteps. No voices. She moved to the back wall. There were 4 flour barrels, all empty or near empty. One had a cracked lid, just as Jonah had said. Ruth lifted it and found flour dust on top. Beneath the flour dust lay a piece of sacking. Beneath the sacking lay a flat bundle wrapped in oilcloth. Her breath caught. She did not unwrap it at once. Instead, she looked toward the door again. A horse snorted outside. A man laughed near the pump. The world went on, unaware that a widow in a black dress was standing in a feed shed with a hidden bundle in her hands. Then she opened it. Inside were old supply receipts, wage notes, vendor letters, and 2 signed agreements concerning the Western grazing line. Some pages were stained. Some had been folded so often they were soft at the creases. Several carried names Ruth had already seen in the ledgers. But here, the numbers were different. Lower. Honest. Her thumb paused on one receipt for timber bought 18 months earlier. The office ledger claimed Silver Creek Ranch had paid for 3 wagon loads. This receipt showed 1. Same date, same seller, same delivery man. Ruth felt the old coldness settle behind her ribs. Not fear. Recognition. She had seen this kind of theft before, not the wild kind done by desperate men. This was slow theft, patient theft. The kind that wore a clean coat and offered concern in a smooth voice. She was copying the receipt details into her small notebook when the shed door creaked. Ruth closed the oilcloth with one hand and turned. Jonah Reed stood in the doorway, the morning behind him, his hat low over his eyes. "You found it," he said. "You knew I would. I hoped you would." "That is not an answer." "No," he said, "it is." He stepped inside, but only a few feet, leaving space between them. Ruth appreciated that. A man who understood distance understood more than most men admitted. She held up one receipt. "These records show different figures than the office books. I figured they might." "You figured." Jonah looked at the floor, then at the barrel. "Some of the men keep their own notes, deliveries, days worked, repairs made. They don't always trust what gets written in the main books." "Why not?" He met her eyes then. "Because pay has been wrong for a long time." The words were simple, that made them worse. Ruth thought of the men she had seen in the yard, weathered faces, patched sleeves, hands cracked from rope and cold water, men who likely counted coins on Saturday night and blamed themselves when there was not enough. "Do they know?" she asked. "They suspect. Suspecting and proving are different trails." "And Elias Voss?" Jonah's jaw shifted once. "He says mistakes happen." "That is what thieves call theft when they own the ink." For the first time, something like approval touched Jonah's face. It was small and gone quickly, but she saw it. "You speak plain, Mrs. Bellamy. I have buried a man who trusted polite language." Jonah went quiet. The shed felt smaller after that. Ruth lowered the receipt. She had not meant to say so much. Samuel's name had not passed her lips, yet there he was between them, standing in the dust with his gentle eyes and ruined lungs. Jonah did not offer pity. He did not say he was sorry in the empty way strangers did when they wanted sorrow moved out of their path. He simply removed his hat. It was an old-fashioned gesture, quiet, respectful. That nearly hurt more. Ruth looked away first. "I need to compare these with the ledgers," she said. "Take them." "No." He frowned slightly. "If they vanish from here, whoever hid them may know. Whoever checks this barrel may know. I will copy what I need and return the bundle exactly as I found it." Jonah studied her. "You've done this before." "I have learned what happens when evidence disappears before the right person sees it." "Who is the right person?" Ruth closed the oilcloth carefully. "That depends on who owns this ranch." Jonah's expression did not change, but the air around him did. It was small, barely anything. But Ruth had spent years noticing barely anything. "Ilya said the owner lives back east," she said. "That is what Ilya says." "Is it true?" Jonah put his hat back on slowly. "The owner does not live back east." Ruth waited. He gave her nothing more. Irritation rose in her, sharp and useful. "Mr. Reed, I am not fond of riddles. If this ranch is being robbed and you know something that could help, then keeping it tucked behind your teeth does not make you mysterious. It makes you dangerous." That landed. For a moment, Jonah looked at her not as a quiet hand, not as a man measuring what to reveal, but as someone who had just been struck in a place already bruised. "You're right," he said. The admission was so direct it took the edge from her anger. He stepped closer to the barrel, lowering his voice. "There are things I can't tell you yet, not because I don't trust your mind. I do, more than is sensible after one day." Ruth did not move. "But if Elias learns what I know," Jonah continued, "he'll change his tracks. If he learns what you know, he'll try to ruin you before you can prove it. So for now, we work with paper. Paper does not get nervous. Paper does not brag. Paper does not warn him." Ruth looked at the bundle in her hands. "That almost sounded like a plan." "It is the beginning of one." "And what am I supposed to trust?" Jonah's eyes held hers. "Not me, not yet. Trust the numbers." That was the first thing he had said that made perfect sense. Ruth took the bundle to a broken crate near the back wall and sat down. Jonah stood watch by the door while she copied every receipt that mattered. Neither of them spoke for a long while. Outside, the ranch worked itself into morning. Wagons rolled. Harness chains jingled. A woman in the cookhouse sang half a hymn and forgot the rest. Inside the shed, Ruth wrote until her fingers cramped. When she finished, she wrapped the bundle and placed it back under the sacking, beneath the flour dust, exactly as she had found it. Jonah opened the door for her. As she stepped into the light, Elias Voss was standing across the yard beside the water trough. He was not close enough to hear, but he was close enough to see. His gaze moved from Ruth to Jonah, then to the feed shed behind them. And there in the clean morning air, his smooth smile returned. Not friendly. Not curious. Warning. Ruth kept walking toward the office, her notebook hidden under the ledger, her face calm, her pulse hard and steady in her throat. Behind her, Jonah said softly, barely loud enough for her to hear, "Now he knows you're worth watching." Ruth did not look back. "Then let him watch," she said. But as she crossed the yard, she felt Silver Creek Ranch change around her. The silence from the day before was gone. Now the whole place felt like a match waiting for flame. By noon, Ruth Bellamy knew Elias Voss had begun setting traps. Not large ones, not the kind a careless man could see from across the yard. Elias was too polished for that. His traps were small, a misplaced receipt, a question asked too gently, a ranch hand sent to her door with the wrong number on his tongue. First came Pete Larkin, a young hand with straw-colored hair and a face that still believed most people meant what they said. Mr. Voss told me you needed the count on the south pasture wire, Pete said, standing awkwardly in her office doorway. Ruth looked up from the ledger. I did not ask Mr. Voss for that. Pete shifted his hat in his hands. He said you did. Did he give you a number? Pete nodded, said we used 12 rolls last month. Ruth kept her face still. The ledger said 27. The hidden receipt in the flour barrel said 12. So Elias was not only watching her, he was testing what she knew. Ruth dipped her pen in ink and wrote Pete's answer down on a clean sheet. Thank you, Pete. That all? For now. Pete started to leave, then stopped. Ma'am. Yes. He looked toward the hall before speaking lower. If I said the wrong thing, I didn't mean to. There it was, fear dressed as manners. Ruth softened her voice. You told the truth as you knew it. That is never the wrong thing. Pete's mouth pressed tight, like he wanted to believe her but had learned better from the world. Then he nodded and left. Ruth sat still after he was gone. 12 rolls. One honest number had just confirmed 3 dishonest pages. She opened Samuel's pocket Bible and slipped Pete's note inside. She did not use the Bible for praying much anymore. She used it for keeping things safe. Samuel would have understood. Outside, the afternoon heat lay heavy over Silver Creek Ranch. The bunkhouse roof shimmered. Horses stood lazy in the shade. A dust devil turned once near the corral and fell apart like a secret losing courage. Ruth worked until her eyes burned. By late afternoon, she had built the first clear pattern. Wire, grain, salt, lumber, kerosene. Each item appeared honestly in one place and swollen in another. Not enough in a single month to raise alarm. Enough over years to bleed a ranch dry. But the wages troubled her more. Money stolen from an owner was one thing. Money stolen from working hands was another. That was food from tables, shoes from children, medicine not bought, a winter coat patched one season too long. She was comparing the pay column for a man named Abel Cross when Elias entered without knocking. Ruth did not jump. She had heard his boots in the hall. Hard at work, he said. That is what I was hired for. He looked around the office with practiced ease. His eyes touched the desk, the cabinet, the window, the ledger under her hand, then her face. You spoke with Pete today. He brought a number. Did he? He said you sent him. Elias smiled. I may have mentioned you were sorting pasture costs. These men like to feel useful. Ruth closed the ledger halfway, leaving her finger inside the page. Useful men often are. Useful men also misunderstand things. His tone was still pleasant, but the room had tightened. Ruth leaned back slightly. What did Pete misunderstand? Elias held her gaze. That business records are not campfire talk. A horse stamped outside. The sound struck the silence hard. Ruth let one breath pass. Then you should be careful what business you send through him. For a moment, Elias' smile vanished. It was so brief another person might have missed it. Ruth did not. Beneath the manager's charm was something thinner and meaner, a man who did not like being answered in his own language. Then the smile returned. You remind me of someone, he said. Do I? The last woman who believed numbers could protect her. Ruth's hand went still on the ledger. There had been no last woman, not in the records she had seen. The previous clerk had been a man, according to everyone. Elias watched her closely. Too closely. He had given her that line on purpose. Ruth made herself blink once slowly, as if bored. And did they? Did what? Protect her. Elias walked to the window and looked out at the yard. No, he said softly, they made her lonely. The word slid cold under Ruth's ribs. Then he turned back. "You are new here, Mrs. Bellamy. You need friends, I can be one." "That sounds generous." "It is practical. A woman alone on a ranch should know whose hand is steady." Ruth thought of Samuel's coffin. She thought of bank papers. She thought of the lawyer smiling as he robbed her with grammar. "My experience," she said, "is that men who announce steady hands usually keep one hidden." Elias studied her for a long moment. Then he laughed. Not because he found it funny, because laughter let him leave without losing. "Careful," he said from the doorway. "A sharp tongue cuts the mouth that carries it." After he left, Ruth did not move for nearly a full minute. Then she wrote down every word he had said. The last woman who believed numbers could protect her. She underlined woman. Twice. At supper, Ruth went to the dining room for the first time. Not because she was hungry. She had little appetite. But Elias had warned her against isolation by pretending concern, and Ruth had lived long enough to know that sometimes the safest thing was to be seen. The room quieted when she entered. Ranch hands sat along two rough tables, tin plates, coffee cups, bread passed hand to hand. The cook, Mrs. Hattie Loom, glanced at Ruth once and gave her a full plate without asking. Beans, beef, potatoes, and a biscuit hard enough to test a tooth. Ruth sat at the end of the table. No one spoke to her at first. Then Jonah Reed came in. He did not sit beside her. That would have been too obvious now. He sat across the room near the wall with his back where he could see both doors. Ruth noticed. Elias would have noticed too if he had been there. But Elias did not eat with the hands. Of course he did not. Halfway through supper, a gray-bearded hand named Abel Cross looked at Ruth. "You the one fixing the books?" "I am trying." A few men glanced up. Abel chewed slowly, then said, "Books been needing fixing a long time." The table went still. Pete looked down at his plate. Jonah did not move. Ruth set her fork down. "What makes you say that, Mr. Cross?" Abel's eyes narrowed, not in anger but in caution. "Didn't say nothing official." "I did not hear anything official." A faint sound moved through the table. Not laughter, not quite, more like men recognizing someone who knew how dangerous plain talk could be. Abel wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. "Sometimes a man works 6 days and gets paid like he worked 5. And when he asks, gets told he remembered wrong." Ruth felt the weight of that settle over the room. "How many men?" she asked. Abel looked at her, then away. "Enough." Before Ruth could ask more, the dining room door opened. Elias Voss stepped in. No one had heard him approach. That was bad. His eyes moved from Abel to Ruth, then around the table. His smile came slow. "Well," he said, "this looks friendly." No one answered. Elias walked deeper into the room, hands easy at his sides. "Mrs. Bellamy, I thought you preferred working through supper." "I decided food improves arithmetic." "Does gossip improve it too?" The men lowered their eyes. Ruth did not. "That depends," she said. "Some gossip contains better records than ledgers." The air went hard. Elias' smile stayed, but now it looked nailed to his face. "May I speak with you outside?" "No," Ruth said. A fork stopped halfway to someone's mouth. Jonah looked at her then, not warning, not approval, something sharper. He knew what she was doing even if he did not like the risk. Elias blinked once. "No. I am eating supper, Mr. Voss. If it concerns ranch accounts, you may speak plainly here. These men seem affected by them." The room held its breath. For the first time since Ruth arrived, Elias Voss had been challenged in front of the hands. Not shouted at. Not accused. Worse, refused. He looked around the room, measuring the damage. Then his gaze settled on Abel Cross. Some men, Elias said quietly, forget how fortunate they are to have steady work. Abel's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Ruth stood. Her chair scraped the floor. Fortune, she said, is rain after drought. It is a healthy child. It is a horse finding its way home in a storm. Wages are not fortune, they are owed. The words landed hard. No one spoke. But something moved through the men. A lift of the eyes, a shift in the shoulders, a silent thing waking up. If this moment touched your heart, stay with the story, because Silver Creek Ranch has not given up all its secrets yet. Elias took one step closer. You are becoming confused about your position here. Ruth picked up her plate. No, she said, I believe I am beginning to understand it. She carried the plate to Mrs. Hattie, thanked her, and walked out before Elias could answer. The night air hit Ruth cool and sharp. She crossed the yard under a sky crowded with stars, her hands steady until she reached the dark side of the office. There, hidden from the windows, she pressed one palm flat against the wall and let her breath shake once. Only once. Then Jonah's voice came from the shadows. That was reckless. Ruth turned. That was necessary. That kind of necessary gets people hurt. Silence already has. Jonah stepped into a blade of moonlight. His face looked harder than it had in the feed shed. You don't know Elias. No, Ruth said, but I know men like him. Jonah looked toward the dining room, where voices had begun again, low and uneasy. You changed something in there. Good. Not all change is safe. Ruth studied him. There was another woman, she said. Jonah went very still. Elias mentioned her. He wanted to see if I knew. I did not. Jonah said nothing. Ruth stepped closer. Who was she? A long silence passed. From the stable came the soft clink of a bridle chain. A lantern near the barn swung in the wind, throwing light and shadow across Jonah's face. At last he said, her name was Miriam Vale. Was. She kept books here before the man, Elias claims, left for Oregon. Ruth felt the cold return. What happened to her? Jonah's eyes moved toward the dark hills beyond the ranch. She found something in the accounts. Then she was accused of stealing from the cash box. Was she guilty? No. What happened after? Jonah swallowed once. She left before dawn with one bag and no wages. 3 days later, her brother came looking for her, said she never reached town. Ruth's breath caught. The ranch seemed suddenly too quiet. Jonah, she said carefully, why is there no record of her? Because Elias removed it. And you know this how? He turned back to her. The moonlight caught his eyes, and for the first time Ruth saw not just caution there, but pain. Because I found her last ledger, he said, and your husband's name was written inside it. Ruth could not speak. For a moment, the yard, the ranch, the stars, even the wind seemed to fall away. Samuel's name. Here, on Silver Creek Ranch. Before Ruth had ever arrived. Jonah reached into his coat and pulled out a folded page, worn soft at the edges. I didn't know what it meant, he said, not until you came. Ruth stared at the paper in his hand. Her fingers felt numb. Elias Voss had not merely stepped into her present. Somehow, impossibly, he had touched the past she buried with Samuel. And as Ruth unfolded the page beneath the swinging lantern, the first words she saw nearly stopped her heart. The first words on the folded page were written in a woman's careful hand. Samuel Bellamy, Denver, loan recall signed under false authority. Ruth read the line once. Then again. The lantern above the office porch swung in the night wind, throwing shadows across the paper, but the words did not change. Her dead husband's name sat there in black ink, quiet and impossible, inside a ledger from a woman Ruth had never met, on a ranch Ruth had only reached 3 days ago. For a moment, she could not hear the horses. She could not hear the wind. She could not even hear Jonah breathing beside her. All she could hear was the scrape of the shovel at Samuel's grave, the low voice of the pastor, the banker's polished boots in the cemetery dirt, the way people had lowered their eyes when she looked at them, as if her loss were a sickness they might catch. She gripped the paper tighter. "Where did you get this?" Jonah's face had gone still in that painful way of his, as if he had learned to hide every feeling by locking it behind his bones. "In the old tack room," he said, "hidden behind a loose board. Miriam must have put it there before she ran." "She did not run." The words came out sharper than Ruth intended. Jonah did not argue. "No," he said quietly, "I don't believe she did." Ruth looked down again. Beneath Samuel's name were others, 6 lines, 6 men, different towns, different loan records, 2 ranchers, 1 freight owner, 1 widow named Lydia Crane, notes beside each name. Early collection. Forged witness. County clerk paid. Pressure through bank. Her hand began to tremble. Not from fear. From rage so old it felt almost clean. "This is not only Silver Creek Ranch," she said. "No. Elias was tied to what happened in Denver. I don't know how deep." Ruth looked at him. "But you suspected." Jonah's jaw tightened. "I suspected Miriam had found a larger pattern. I did not know it reached your husband." Ruth stared at Samuel's name until the letters blurred. She had come to Silver Creek for work. She had told herself she was not chasing ghosts. She had told herself Samuel was buried, the farm was gone, and all that remained was survival. But here was his name. Not in a memory. Not in her grief. In evidence. A door opened somewhere inside the main house. Jonah moved first. He took Ruth gently by the elbow, not pulling, only guiding her into the shadow beside the office wall. Across the yard, Elias Voss stepped out onto the porch. He stood under the lamp outside the dining room, his coat buttoned, his head slightly turned, listening. Ruth folded the page fast and pressed it inside Samuel's Bible. Elias looked toward the office. For one terrible second, Ruth thought he had seen them. Then a stable hand called from the barn, asking about a loose mare, and Elias turned his head. Jonah leaned close enough for Ruth to hear him, without anyone else hearing. "Go to your room, lock the door." "No." "Ruth." It was the first time he had used her name. That made her look at him. His voice was low, but there was iron beneath it. "He gave you Miriam's name today because he wanted to frighten you. If he finds out you have her page, he will stop smiling." "He already has." "Not fully." The way Jonah said it made the night feel colder. Ruth looked once more toward Elias. He was speaking to the stable hand now, calm as church glass, but his eyes kept returning to the office porch. "All right," she said, "but I am not hiding." "I know. You keep saying things like that. Because they keep being true." That should not have warmed her. Not now. Not with Samuel's name burning inside the little Bible against her ribs. But it did. Ruth crossed the yard alone. She did not hurry. Hurrying showed guilt. She passed close enough to Elias that he turned from the stable hand and watched her. "Late walk, Mrs. Bellamy." "Fresh air helps after a heavy supper." His eyes moved to her hands, empty. Then to her face. "You seemed moved at table tonight." Men speaking honestly often has that effect. That is one word for it. What word would you use? He smiled softly. Dangerous. Ruth held his gaze. Honesty usually is, Mr. Voss, mostly to liars. The stable hand went very still. Elia's expression did not change, but something in the air did. A horse snorted in the dark. The lantern hissed above them. Then Elia stepped aside. Sleep well, Mrs. Bellamy. I intend to. She walked past him and did not let her shoulders loosen until she reached her room. Only when the door was locked did Ruth take out the Bible, remove Miriam Vale's page, and lay it on the bed. Samuel Bellamy. False authority. County clerk paid. She sat beside the page until the candle burned low. There were moments when grief did not come as tears. Sometimes it came as understanding. A hard, merciless understanding that the person you lost had not simply been unlucky. He had been aimed at, pressed, chosen, folded into a machine built by men who never had to see the graves they caused. Ruth covered her mouth with her hand. She did not cry loudly. That much pride remained. But one tear fell on her glove, then another. She let them come for less than a minute. Then she wiped her face, took out her notebook, and began copying Miriam's page word for word. By sunrise, Ruth had formed a dangerous thought. The fraud at Silver Creek was not separate from Samuel's ruin. Elias Voss had either worked with the same men or learned from them. Either way, Miriam Vale had been close enough to see the pattern. And then Miriam vanished. After breakfast, Ruth did exactly what Elias would expect. She returned to the office, opened the ledgers, and worked in plain sight. But now she was not only checking ranch accounts. She was hunting a ghost. Miriam had left traces, small ones. Ruth began looking for missing spaces instead of present records, a torn stub in the receipt book, a page number skipped in an old ledger, a payroll column rewritten in a hand that did not match the rest. Every absence became a voice. Near noon, Mrs. Hattie Loom came in carrying a cup of broth. You look like death warmed badly, Hattie said. Ruth glanced up. Thank you. That was not a compliment. I did not take it as one. Hattie set the broth on the desk and looked toward the hall before lowering her voice. You asked about Miriam. Ruth's pen stopped. I did not ask you. No, but men carry fear loud even when they whisper. Hattie wiped her hands on her apron. Miriam was a good girl, quiet, too thin, always counting things on scraps, said once numbers were like hoofprints. Follow them long enough, you find who passed through. Ruth kept her voice calm. When did she leave? Hattie's face closed. That is what Mr. Voss called it. What do you call it? The cook looked toward the window. I call it a woman gone without her shawl in October. Ruth's stomach tightened. She left her shawl. And her hair comb, bone comb, blue flowers painted on it. Woman does not leave a thing like that unless she means to come back. Where are they now? Hattie hesitated. Ruth leaned forward. Hattie, if Miriam found something and Elias buried it, he may do the same again. The older woman's eyes moved over Ruth's face. Whatever she saw there seemed to make her decide. Old washroom, behind the broken stove, there's a box. Ruth stood. Not now, Hattie snapped. Lord save us from brave women with no timing. Ruth paused. Hattie shoved the broth closer. You will drink that. You will work until supper. You will smile at Mr. Voss if he comes in. Then after dark, when men are tired and fools think the day is done, you look. Ruth sat back down. For the first time since morning, a faint smile touched her mouth. You give orders well, Mrs. Loom. I raised 4 sons and buried 1 husband. I give orders better than most captains." Ruth drank the broth. It tasted of pepper, bone, and kindness. That evening, Elias came by the office with a stack of papers under his arm. "I have been thinking," he said. "That seems to be going around." He ignored that. "The quarterly report is due soon. I'll need your preliminary summaries by tomorrow." "That is earlier than you first requested." "Plans change." He set the papers on her desk. "These are corrected copies of last season's vendor accounts. Use these instead of the older books. They contain adjustments the previous clerk failed to enter." Ruth looked at the papers. "Clean copies. No smudges. Too clean." He was replacing the trail. "How helpful," she said. "I thought so." His eyes rested on her face, searching for worry. Ruth gave him mild gratitude and nothing else. After he left, she did not touch the papers for 10 full minutes. Then she lifted the top page with 2 fingers and saw the trap. The copied accounts corrected several inflated charges. Not all. Just enough to make Elias look like he was the one cleaning up a past clerk's errors. Just enough to turn Ruth's future accusation into a misunderstanding. Just enough to make him innocent before she ever accused him. He was not only hiding theft now. He was preparing a defense. At supper, Ruth ate quietly. Jonah did not look at her once, which meant he was watching Elias. Hattie moved through the room with a coffee pot and a face like a locked door. Abel Cross kept rubbing the back of his left hand, nervous without wanting to show it. Elias was not present. That worried Ruth more than if he had been. When darkness settled, Ruth waited another hour. Then she left her room with Samuel's Bible in her pocket and a candle stub hidden in her sleeve. Jonah was waiting near the old washroom. Of course he was. "You heard Hattie," Ruth said. "I saw her give you broth. That woman only feeds secrets when they're heavy." Despite herself, Ruth almost smiled. The old washroom sat behind the main house, half used for storage now. Broken chairs, cracked basins, a rusted stove with one leg propped on a brick. Jonah lifted the stove while Ruth reached behind it. Her fingers touched wood. She pulled out a small box wrapped in cloth. Inside lay a faded shawl, a bone comb painted with blue flowers, and a packet of folded papers tied with a ribbon. Ruth opened the top page. Miriam's handwriting. This time it was not a list. It was a letter. "To whoever finds this, I am not mistaken. Elias Voss is moving money through 3 names, but he answers to a man in Denver. If I disappear, find Ruth Bellamy's loan file." Ruth stopped breathing. "Silas. Not Samuel." She read it again. Ruth Bellamy. Her husband's father. The paper shook in her hand. Jonah leaned closer. "Ruth." She looked up at him, her face pale in the candlelight. "This began before Samuel," she whispered. "They did not start with my husband." A board creaked outside the washroom. Both of them froze. The candle flame bent. Then Elias Voss's voice came from the other side of the door, soft and almost amused. "Mrs. Bellamy," he said, "you do have a gift for finding things that don't belong to you." Jonah moved between Ruth and the door. Ruth clutched Miriam's letter against Samuel's Bible. The latch began to turn. The latch turned halfway. Jonah Reed did not move like a man reaching for a fight. He moved like a door closing against a storm. One step, quiet, firm. His shoulder came between Ruth and the washroom entrance, and his right hand lowered beside his coat, not touching anything, not threatening, but ready enough that Elias Voss stopped outside the door. That pause told Ruth more than a shout would have. Elias was not afraid of Jonah. but he was not careless around him either. "Step away from the door, Jonah," Elias said, his voice still smooth. "This does not concern you." Jonah's answer was low. "Then you won't mind saying it from there." Ruth stood behind him with Miriam Vale's letter pressed against Samuel's Bible, her heart beating hard but her mind strangely clear. The candle flame shook beside the cracked stove. Dust hung in the air. The little bone comb with blue flowers lay open in the box like a piece of someone's unfinished life. Elias gave a soft laugh from the hallway. "You forget your place." "No," Jonah said. "I remember it better every day." Ruth heard the silence that followed. It was not confusion. It was recognition trying to find its shape. Then Elias spoke again, and now the pleasantness had a wire under it. "Mrs. Bellamy, I am going to ask you once to hand over whatever Mrs. Loom hid in that room." Ruth looked down at the letter. "If I disappear, find Silas Bellamy's loan file." Silas Bellamy had died when Samuel was 16. Samuel had told her little about him, only that his father had lost land in a dispute that left the family broken for years. Ruth had never pressed. Some men carried childhood losses like old bullets, too deep to remove without tearing them open. Now that old family wound had a name. Elias Voss. Or someone above him. Ruth stepped out from behind Jonah, just enough for her voice to carry. "No." The latch stopped moving. "No," Elias repeated. "You heard me. Mrs. Bellamy, taking private property from ranch storage is theft." Ruth looked at the faded shawl, the comb, the papers. "Miriam Vale's things are not yours." A small sound came through the door, not a laugh this time, something closer to irritation slipping its leash. "You have been here less than a week," Elias said. "You are tired, widowed, and perhaps more emotional than you realize. I would hate for this ranch to remember you as another woman who became confused by matters beyond her." The words were meant to strike. They did, but not where Elias intended. Ruth thought of Miriam leaving without her shawl, Samuel dying with questions folded inside him, Silas Bellamy's name buried in a lost letter. How many people had been called confused because a thief had better manners than they did? She moved closer to the door. Jonah turned his head slightly, warning her without speaking. Ruth ignored the warning. "Open it," she said to Jonah. His jaw tightened. "Ruth, open it." A beat passed. Then Jonah opened the door. Elias stood in the hall with a lamp in one hand. Its glow carved his face into gold and shadow. He was still dressed neatly, though it was late. His watch chain rested against his vest. His eyes went first to Jonah, then to Ruth, then to the box behind them. He saw the bone comb. For the first time since Ruth had met him, Elias Voss looked genuinely angry. Not cornered. Not cautious. Angry. "You should have left dead matters alone," he said. Ruth held up Miriam's letter. "Dead matters have a habit of waiting for honest hands." Elias' gaze sharpened on the page. "What do you think that proves?" "That Miriam knew about a pattern of fraud tied to Denver, that she was afraid, that she named my husband's father, that she disappeared after finding it." "Disappeared?" Elias tilted his head. "That is a dramatic word." "What word do you prefer for a woman gone without her shawl in October?" His eyes flicked once. Only once. But Ruth saw it. Hattie had told the truth. Elias knew exactly what Miriam left behind. From the far end of the hall came the sound of a door opening. Mrs. Hattie Loom stood there in a night wrapper with a shotgun held low in both hands. It was old, likely unloaded, but she held it like a woman who had raised sons and buried fear a long time ago. "Evening, Mr. Voss," Hattie said. Elias turned slowly. Hattie, go back to your room. No. A second refusal in one night. The ranch itself seemed to listen. Hattie came closer, the shotgun steady enough. You've been telling folks Miriam ran. I've been hearing it 5 years. Heard it so long some mornings I near hated myself for not shouting over it. Hattie, Elias said softly, you are making a mistake. I made my mistake when I let that girl's thing stay hidden and said nothing. Ruth looked at the older woman. Hattie's mouth trembled once, then tightened again. I was scared, Hattie said, not to Elias now but to Ruth. That is the plain truth. Scared for my job, scared for the boys still here, scared because men like him don't need to raise a hand when they can ruin a name. Elias set his lamp on a narrow shelf. This is becoming foolish. Jonah stepped forward. No, it's becoming witnessed. That word changed the hallway. Witnessed. Elias looked at him, and for one bare instant the mask cracked wider. Ruth saw not fear yet, but the first understanding that this night was no longer private. Hattie had heard. Jonah had heard. Ruth held a letter, and Elias could not smooth all of them into silence at once. He recovered quickly. Very well, Elias said. Keep the keepsakes. Keep the sad little letter. You have no official record. No court will open a case because a runaway clerk wrote frightened nonsense and hid a comb. Ruth folded the letter carefully. Then you have no reason to be troubled. His eyes darkened. You are dangerous because you do not understand what you are stirring. No, Ruth said, I am dangerous because I do. For a long moment, no one moved. Then Elias picked up his lamp. Tomorrow morning, he said, we will discuss your continued employment. I look forward to it. No, he said, his voice dropping, you won't. He walked away down the hall. Only when his footsteps faded did Hattie lower the shotgun. It ain't loaded, she muttered. Jonah looked at her. I am glad he didn't ask. Hattie gave him a hard look, so am I. For one strange second, Ruth almost laughed. The laugh rose in her throat and hurt there, caught between terror and relief. Then Hattie's face softened. You keep that letter close, she told Ruth, but not in your room. He'll search it before sunrise if he thinks he can. Ruth nodded. I know. Hattie looked at Jonah. You know a place. Jonah did not answer at once. Then he said, yes. The way he said it pulled Ruth's eyes to him. Hattie noticed too. Her gaze narrowed with old woman sharpness, but she asked nothing. They put Miriam's shawl, comb, and remaining papers back in the box. Ruth kept the letter and the page with Samuel's name. Hattie returned to her room, walking with the slow dignity of a woman who had been afraid for years and had finally spent the last of it. Jonah led Ruth outside through the rear door. The night had deepened. Clouds had moved over the stars. The yard lay dim, with only a few lanterns burning near the barn. Somewhere beyond the corral, cattle shifted in their sleep. Ruth held the papers inside Samuel's Bible beneath her shawl. Where are we going? She asked. Somewhere Elias won't look. That is not an answer. It is the safest answer for another 5 minutes. She studied his profile as they crossed behind the wash house. Jonah Reed was a quiet ranch hand with patched boots. Jonah Reed knew hidden papers, old rooms, Elias' habits, and places the manager would not search. Jonah Reed spoke to Hattie like a man used to being obeyed but careful not to show it. Ruth had been patient enough. She stopped walking. No more riddles. Jonah turned. The wind moved between them, carrying the smell of hay and cold iron. Ruth, not here. Yes, here. His eyes lifted toward the main house, then back to her. She stepped closer, keeping her voice low. I have followed your hints. I have trusted numbers. I have put myself in Elia's path while you stand beside me with half-truths in your mouth. I will not carry Miriam's letter, my husband's name, and my father-in-law's ruin into the dark with a man I do not know." Jonah flinched at that. Just slightly. But he did. "I know enough," she continued. "You are not just a hand. Don't insult me by pretending otherwise." He was quiet for so long Ruth thought he might still refuse. Then his shoulders lowered, almost as if something heavy had slipped from them. "You're right," he said. "I am aware." That almost brought a smile to his face. Almost. He looked toward the low ridge beyond the barns. "There's an old spring house north of the creek, stone walls, iron door. My father built it before the main house went up." Ruth's breath slowed. "My father," she repeated. Jonah met her eyes. "Yes." The word hung there in the dark. Ruth understood before he said the rest, but she still needed to hear it. Jonah removed his hat. "My name is not Jonah Reed," he said quietly. "Not full out, it's Jonah Reed Ashford." Ashford. Ruth knew the name. Everyone in that county knew the name. Silver Creek Ranch belonged to the Ashford family, though Elias had told her the owner lived far away and rarely came west. Her mouth went dry. "You own Silver Creek Ranch?" "Yes." The night seemed to widen around them. Ruth stared at him and several feelings struck at once, shock first, then anger, then something sharper than both. Humiliation. She had been standing on his land, risking her position, her safety, and maybe her name, while he watched from behind a false one. "You let me believe I was alone against him," she said. "No." "Yes." Jonah took the correction without defense. "I let you believe I was less than I am," he said. "That was wrong." "Wrong is a gentle word." "I know." "Then use a harder one." His face tightened. "Cowardly." That stopped her. Not because she disagreed, because he had said it without excuse. He looked toward the house, then back. "My father trusted the wrong men and died ashamed of mistakes that were not all his. When Elias came recommended, I was young enough to want someone else to carry the business and proud enough to believe I would know if he cheated me. By the time I saw it, he had friends in town, papers in order, and every man on this ranch trained to speak around him." He swallowed once. "So I stepped down into the work, patched boots, old name, hired hand wages. Men speak differently around a man they think has no power." Ruth's anger did not leave. But it changed shape. "You have been hiding on your own ranch." "Yes." "For how long?" 3 years. The answer sat heavily between them. 3 years of patched boots. 3 years of silence. 3 years of watching Elias smile over stolen wages and missing women and crooked papers. "That is a lonely kind of penance," Ruth said. Jonah's eyes softened with pain. "It is also an incomplete one. That is why I needed someone who could read what I could only feel was wrong." "You needed an accountant." "I needed you." Ruth looked away. Those words reached too close to places she was not ready to open. From the main house, a door shut hard. Jonah put his hat back on. "We need to move." Ruth followed him past the corral, down the slope toward the creek. The water reflected the broken clouds in thin silver lines. They crossed on flat stones slick with moss, and Jonah held out one hand without looking at her. Ruth hesitated. Then she took it. His hand was warm, rough, and steady. He did not hold too long after she reached the other bank. The spring house stood beneath cottonwoods, half hidden by brush. Jonah unlocked the iron door with a key from inside his boot heel. Ruth noticed. Of course she noticed. Inside, the air was cool and smelled of stone, water, and old earth. Jonah lifted a loose floor slab near the back wall. Beneath it was a dry cavity wrapped in tin. "Elias doesn't know this is here," he said. Ruth placed Samuel's Bible inside, with Miriam's letter tucked safely between its pages. For a moment, she kept her fingers on the cover. Samuel had carried that Bible through drought, debt, and the last winter of his life. Now it held the first real clue that his ruin had not been fate. "Tell me something true," Ruth said softly. Jonah crouched beside her. "Ask. If we expose Elias, does it bring Samuel back?" "No." The answer hurt because it was honest. "Does it clear his name?" Jonah paused. "If the loan file proves what Miriam believed, yes, it may." Ruth closed her eyes once. "Then we find it." "We will." She opened her eyes. "No, I will, you may help." This time Jonah did smile, faintly and sadly. "Fair enough." They sealed the papers beneath the stone. When they stepped back into the night, the wind had changed. Clouds crowded the moon. The ranch house in the distance looked peaceful. Too peaceful. Near the barn, a lantern moved. Then another. Jonah's body went still. "What is it?" Ruth whispered. He did not answer. A figure crossed the yard fast, then disappeared behind the office. Another moved toward the women's rooms. Ruth's stomach tightened. "My room," she said. Jonah's voice dropped. "He's already searching." They hurried back, keeping low along the creek bank until they reached the rear of the main house. Ruth's window stood dark. But the curtain moved. Someone was inside. Jonah caught her arm before she stepped forward. A moment later, Elias Voss emerged from Ruth's room carrying her travel case. He crossed the porch, went down the steps, and handed it to one of his men. "Take it to the burn pit," Elias said. Ruth's blood went cold. Inside that case were her copied notes. Not all of them. Not Miriam's letter. But enough. Enough to set fire to 20 hours of work. Jonah looked at Ruth, his face hard in the darkness. Ruth stared toward the burn pit, where the first orange flame had begun to rise. Then she lifted her chin. "Let him burn it," she whispered. Jonah turned sharply. "What?" Ruth's eyes stayed on Elias Voss. "Tomorrow morning, he will think he destroyed my proof." The flames grew brighter. "And when a man believes he has already won," Ruth said, "he stops hiding how he cheats." The latch turned halfway. Jonah Reed did not move like a man reaching for a fight. He moved like a door closing against a storm. One step, quiet, firm. His shoulder came between Ruth and the washroom entrance, and his right hand lowered beside his coat, not touching anything, not threatening, but ready enough that Elias Voss stopped outside the door. That pause told Ruth more than a shout would have. Elias was not afraid of Jonah. But he was not careless around him either. "Step away from the door, Jonah," Elias said, his voice still smooth. "This does not concern you." Jonah's answer was low. "Then you won't mind saying it from there." Ruth stood behind him with Miriam Vale's letter pressed against Samuel's Bible, her heart beating hard but her mind strangely clear. The candle flame shook beside the cracked stove. Dust hung in the air. The little bone comb with blue flowers lay open in the box like a piece of someone's unfinished life. Elias gave a soft laugh from the hallway. "You forget your place." "No," Jonah said. "I remember it better every day." Ruth heard the silence that followed. It was not confusion. It was recognition trying to find its shape. Then Elias spoke again, and now the pleasantness had a wire under it. "Mrs. Bellamy, I am going to ask you once to hand over whatever Mrs. Loom hid in that room." Ruth looked down at the letter. "If I disappear, Find Silas Bellamy's loan file. Silas Bellamy had died when Samuel was 16. Samuel had told her little about him, only that his father had lost land in a dispute that left the family broken for years. Ruth had never pressed. Some men carried childhood losses like old bullets, too deep to remove without tearing them open. Now that old family wound had a name. Elias Voss. Or someone above him. Ruth stepped out from behind Jonah, just enough for her voice to carry. No. The latch stopped moving. No, Elias repeated. You heard me. Mrs. Bellamy, taking private property from ranch storage is theft. Ruth looked at the faded shawl, the comb, the papers. Miriam Vale's things are not yours. A small sound came through the door, not a laugh this time, something closer to irritation slipping its leash. You have been here less than a week, Elias said. You are tired, widowed, and perhaps more emotional than you realize. I would hate for this ranch to remember you as another woman who became confused by matters beyond her. The words were meant to strike. They did, but not where Elias intended. Ruth thought of Miriam leaving without her shawl, Samuel dying with questions folded inside him, Silas Bellamy's name buried in a lost letter. How many people had been called confused because a thief had better manners than they did? She moved closer to the door. Jonah turned his head slightly, warning her without speaking. Ruth ignored the warning. Open it, she said to Jonah. His jaw tightened. Ruth. Open it. A beat passed. Then Jonah opened the door. Elias stood in the hall with a lamp in one hand. Its glow carved his face into gold and shadow. He was still dressed neatly, though it was late. His watch chain rested against his vest. His eyes went first to Jonah, then to Ruth, then to the box behind them. He saw the bone comb. For the first time since Ruth had met him, Elias Voss looked genuinely angry. Not cornered. Not cautious. Angry. You should have left dead matters alone, he said. Ruth held up Miriam's letter. Dead matters have a habit of waiting for honest hands. Elias' gaze sharpened on the page. What do you think that proves? That Miriam knew about a pattern of fraud tied to Denver, that she was afraid, that she named my husband's father, that she disappeared after finding it. Disappeared, Elias tilted his head. That is a dramatic word. What word do you prefer for a woman gone without her shawl in October? His eyes flicked once. Only once. But Ruth saw it. Hattie had told the truth. Elias knew exactly what Miriam left behind. From the far end of the hall came the sound of a door opening. Mrs. Hattie Loom stood there in a night wrapper with a shotgun held low in both hands. It was old, likely unloaded, but she held it like a woman who had raised sons and buried fear a long time ago. Evening, Mr. Voss, Hattie said. Elias turned slowly. Hattie, go back to your room. No. A second refusal in one night. The ranch itself seemed to listen. Hattie came closer, the shotgun steady enough. You've been telling folks Miriam ran. I've been hearing it 5 years. Heard it so long some mornings I near hated myself for not shouting over it. Hattie, Elias said softly, you are making a mistake. I made my mistake when I let that girl's thing stay hidden and said nothing. Ruth looked at the older woman. Hattie's mouth trembled once, then tightened again. I was scared, Hattie said, not to Elias now, but to Ruth. That is the plain truth. Scared for my job, scared for the boys still here, scared because men like him don't need to raise a hand when they can ruin a name. Elias set his lamp on a narrow shelf. This is becoming foolish. Jonah stepped forward. No, it's becoming witnessed. That word changed the hallway. Witnessed. Elias looked at him, and for one bare instant the mask cracked wider. Ruth saw not fear yet, but the first understanding that this night was no longer private. Hattie had heard. Jonah had heard. Ruth held a letter, and Elias could not smooth all of them into silence at once. He recovered quickly. "Very well," Elias said. "Keep the keepsakes. Keep the sad little letter. You have no official record. No court will open a case because a runaway clerk wrote frightened nonsense and hid a comb." Ruth folded the letter carefully. "Then you have no reason to be troubled." His eyes darkened. "You are dangerous because you do not understand what you are stirring." "No," Ruth said. "I am dangerous because I do." For a long moment, no one moved. Then Elias picked up his lamp. "Tomorrow morning," he said, "we will discuss your continued employment." "I look forward to it." "No," he said, his voice dropping, "you won't." He walked away down the hall. Only when his footsteps faded did Hattie lower the shotgun. "It ain't loaded," she muttered. Jonah looked at her. "I am glad he didn't ask." Hattie gave him a hard look. "So am I." For one strange second, Ruth almost laughed. The laugh rose in her throat and hurt there, caught between terror and relief. Then Hattie's face softened. "You keep that letter close," she told Ruth, "but not in your room. He'll search it before sunrise if he thinks he can." Ruth nodded. "I know." Hattie looked at Jonah. "You know a place?" Jonah did not answer at once. Then he said, "Yes." The way he said it pulled Ruth's eyes to him. Hattie noticed too. Her gaze narrowed with old woman sharpness, but she asked nothing. They put Miriam's shawl, comb, and remaining papers back in the box. Ruth kept the letter and the page with Samuel's name. Hattie returned to her room, walking with the slow dignity of a woman who had been afraid for years and had finally spent the last of it. Jonah led Ruth outside through the rear door. The night had deepened. Clouds had moved over the stars. The yard lay dim, with only a few lanterns burning near the barn. Somewhere beyond the corral, cattle shifted in their sleep. Ruth held the papers inside Samuel's Bible beneath her shawl. "Where are we going?" she asked. "Somewhere Elias won't look." That is not an answer. It is the safest answer for another 5 minutes. She studied his profile as they crossed behind the wash house. Jonah Reed was a quiet ranch hand with patched boots. Jonah Reed knew hidden papers, old rooms, Elias' habits, and places the manager would not search. Jonah Reed spoke to Hattie like a man used to being obeyed but careful not to show it. Ruth had been patient enough. She stopped walking. "No more riddles." Jonah turned. The wind moved between them, carrying the smell of hay and cold iron. "Ruth not here." "Yes, here." His eyes lifted toward the main house, then back to her. She stepped closer, keeping her voice low. "I have followed your hints. I have trusted numbers. I have put myself in Elias' path while you stand beside me with half-truths in your mouth. I will not carry Miriam's letter, my husband's name, and my father-in-law's ruin into the dark with a man I do not know." Jonah flinched at that. Just slightly. But he did. "I know enough," she continued. "You are not just a hand. Don't insult me by pretending otherwise." He was quiet for so long Ruth thought he might still refuse. Then his shoulders lowered, almost as if something heavy had slipped from them. "You're right," he said. "I am aware." That almost brought a smile to his face. Almost. He looked toward the low ridge beyond the barns. "There's an old spring house north of the creek, stone walls, iron door. My father built it before the main house went up." Ruth's breath slowed. "My father," she repeated. Jonah met her eyes. "Yes." The word hung there in the dark. Ruth understood before he said the rest. but she still needed to hear it. Jonah removed his hat. "My name is not Jonah Reed," he said quietly. "Not full out, it's Jonah Reed Ashford." Ashford. Ruth knew the name. Everyone in that county knew the name. Silver Creek Ranch belonged to the Ashford family, though Elias had told her the owner lived far away and rarely came west. Her mouth went dry. "You own Silver Creek Ranch?" "Yes." The night seemed to widen around them. Ruth stared at him and several feelings struck at once, shock first, then anger, then something sharper than both. Humiliation. She had been standing on his land, risking her position, her safety, and maybe her name, while he watched from behind a false one. "You let me believe I was alone against him," she said. "No." "Yes." Jonah took the correction without defense. "I let you believe I was less than I am," he said. "That was wrong." "Wrong is a gentle word." "I know." "Then use a harder one." His face tightened. "Cowardly." That stopped her. Not because she disagreed, because he had said it without excuse. He looked toward the house, then back. "My father trusted the wrong men and died ashamed of mistakes that were not all his. When Elias came recommended, I was young enough to want someone else to carry the business and proud enough to believe I would know if he cheated me. By the time I saw it, he had friends in town, papers in order, and every man on this ranch trained to speak around him." He swallowed once. "So I stepped down into the work, patched boots, old name, hired hand wages. Men speak differently around a man they think has no power." Ruth's anger did not leave. But it changed shape. "You have been hiding on your own ranch." "Yes." "For how long?" 3 years. The answer sat heavily between them. 3 years of patched boots, 3 years of silence, 3 years of watching Elias smile over stolen wages and missing women and crooked papers. "That is a lonely kind of penance," Ruth said. Jonah's eyes softened with pain. "It is also an incomplete one. That is why I needed someone who could read what I could only feel was wrong." "You needed an accountant." "I needed you." Ruth looked away. Those words reached too close to places she was not ready to open. From the main house, a door shut hard. Jonah put his hat back on. "We need to move." Ruth followed him past the corral, down the slope toward the creek. The water reflected the broken clouds in thin silver lines. They crossed on flat stones slick with moss, and Jonah held out one hand without looking at her. Ruth hesitated. Then she took it. His hand was warm, rough, and steady. He did not hold too long after she reached the other bank. The spring house stood beneath cottonwoods, half hidden by brush. Jonah unlocked the iron door with a key from inside his boot heel. Ruth noticed. Of course she noticed. Inside, the air was cool and smelled of stone, water, and old earth. Jonah lifted a loose floor slab near the back wall. Beneath it was a dry cavity wrapped in tin. "Elias doesn't know this is here," he said. Ruth placed Samuel's Bible inside, with Miriam's letter tucked safely between its pages. For a moment, she kept her fingers on the cover. Samuel had carried that Bible through drought, debt, and the last winter of his life. Now it held the first real clue that his ruin had not been fate. "Tell me something true," Ruth said softly. Jonah crouched beside her. "Ask. If we expose Elias, does it bring Samuel back?" "No." The answer hurt because it was honest. "Does it clear his name?" Jonah paused. "If the loan file proves what Miriam believed, yes, it may." Ruth closed her eyes once. "Then we find it." "We will." She opened her eyes. "No, I will, you may help." This time Jonah did smile, faintly and sadly. "Fair enough." They sealed the papers beneath the stone. When they stepped back into the night, the wind had changed. Clouds crowded the moon. The ranch house in the distance looked peaceful. Too peaceful. Near the barn, a lantern moved. Then another. Jonah's body went still. "What is it?" Ruth whispered. He did not answer. A figure crossed the yard fast, then disappeared behind the office. Another moved toward the women's rooms. Ruth's stomach tightened. "My room," she said. Jonah's voice dropped. "He's already searching." They hurried back, keeping low along the creek bank until they reached the rear of the main house. Ruth's window stood dark. But the curtain moved. Someone was inside. Jonah caught her arm before she stepped forward. A moment later, Elias Voss emerged from Ruth's room carrying her travel case. He crossed the porch, went down the steps, and handed it to one of his men. "Take it to the burn pit," Elias said. Ruth's blood went cold. Inside that case were her copied notes. Not all of them. Not Miriam's letter. But enough. Enough to set fire to 20 hours of work. Jonah looked at Ruth, his face hard in the darkness. Ruth stared toward the burn pit, where the first orange flame had begun to rise. Then she lifted her chin. "Let him burn it," she whispered. Jonah turned sharply. "What?" Ruth's eyes stayed on Elias Voss. "Tomorrow morning, he will think he destroyed my proof." The flames grew brighter. "And when a man believes he has already won," Ruth said, "he stops hiding how he cheats." The name on the courier's satchel struck Ruth harder than the morning sun. Bellamy Land and Loan. For one foolish second, she thought her eyes had betrayed her. Bellamy was not an uncommon name in the world, but the mark beneath it was not common at all. 3 short lines crossed by a half circle, drawn like a brand. Ruth had seen it less than 12 hours earlier beside Samuel's name on Miriam Vale's hidden page. Now it sat stamped on a Denver courier's leather satchel, carried straight into Elias Voss's hands. Across the yard, Elias folded the letter and slipped it into his coat. He did not rush. He did not hide. He looked toward Ruth's office window with the expression of a man who had found the knife he needed. Then he turned and walked into the main house. Ruth felt Jonah beside her. "You know that name," he said. It was Samuel's family name. His family owned a loan company. "No." She said it too quickly, then stopped. Samuel had not spoken much about his father's business. Ruth knew Silas Bellamy had once kept land contracts and small loans for settlers around Denver. Nothing large. Nothing grand. Samuel had called it a desk business, the kind that kept ink under a man's nails instead of dirt. After Silas lost the family property, the business name disappeared. At least that was what Samuel had believed. Ruth stared at the yard. Someone kept using it. Jonah's mouth tightened. Elias just received a letter from them. "Not them," Ruth said. "A man hiding behind them." Abel Cross stood near the office door, his pay slips forgotten in his hand. "Ma'am," he said slowly, "you look like you seen a grave open." Ruth turned from the window. "In a way, I have." The room held quiet. Pete swallowed. Hattie crossed herself once, then pretended she had only adjusted her collar. Ruth reached for the chair but did not sit. If she sat, she feared the weight of it would pin her there. Samuel's father, Samuel's loan, Miriam Vale, Elias, Denver, Silver Creek. It was not a chain anymore, it was a net. And Ruth had been standing inside it for years, without seeing the rope. Jonah stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Tell me what you need." That simple sentence steadied her more than comfort would have. Comfort might have softened her. Need gave her shape. "I need that letter." Jonah did not hesitate. Elias will keep it on him. Then we make him put it somewhere else. How? Ruth looked at the open ledger on the desk, then at the black ash drifting faintly beyond the window from the burn pit, then at Abel's pay slips. By giving him a larger problem. Hattie's eyes sharpened. That sounds like trouble wearing Sunday shoes. It is. Good, Hattie said. I never trusted Sunday shoes. Ruth turned to Abel. Bring me your pay slips. He placed the folded papers on her desk. They were worn soft from years of being saved, each one creased carefully. A working man's private defense. Ruth handled them with respect. Pete, she said, go to the bunkhouse. Ask quietly who else has old pay slips, tally marks, work notes, letters home mentioning wages, anything with dates. Pete nodded, then paused. Should I say why? No, say I am fixing an error. That ain't a lie. No, Ruth said. It is the plainest truth on this ranch. Pete ran. Hattie leaned against the doorframe, and me. Breakfast records, kitchen orders, anything that shows how many men were fed each day. If Elias claims fewer men worked than were paid, meals will prove bodies were here. Hattie smiled without warmth. I told him years ago he underestimated beans. She left. Only Jonah remained. Ruth gathered the first pay slip and compared it to the official ledger. Her pen moved fast and clean. In March, Abel had been paid for 22 days. His own slip showed 19. The bunkhouse duty board, if it still existed, might prove 24. The office ledger claimed deductions for damaged tack. Abel's slip did not list them. A theft hidden in fog. Ruth began clearing it. Jonah watched her for a moment. You said you need to give Elias a larger problem. I do. You're going to show him you have the wage proof. Part of it. That may push him. I want him pushed. He becomes less careful when pushed, but also more dangerous. Ruth looked up. Then stand near enough to matter. He held her gaze. I have been trying to. The words were quiet, but they landed with a strange tenderness neither of them had time to touch. Ruth looked back down before her heart could answer. By late afternoon, the office had become something Elias Voss would have hated if he had dared look inside. Men came one by one. Never in a crowd. Never loudly. Abel brought pay slips and a torn work calendar. Pete brought 2 letters from his mother, who had written back to him each month noting how much he claimed he earned. Another hand, Levi Boone, brought a piece of leather with tally cuts he had made for night watch duty because he did not trust his memory. Hattie brought kitchen orders, coffee counts, and a flower book so exact Ruth nearly kissed her hand. You kept all this? Ruth asked. Hattie sniffed. Food tells truth. Men lie about everything except how much bread they ate. The second letter took shape slowly, page by page. Not a ranch ledger. A people's ledger. It held the truth Elias had never bothered to fear because it had been scattered in pockets, kitchens, saddlebags, and tired memories. He had controlled the office. He had not controlled the lives outside it. Near sundown, Ruth sent Abel to invite Elias to the office. Jonah looked at her sharply. Now. You're not ready. I'm ready enough for what I need. What do you need? For him to believe I am reckless. Jonah's eyes narrowed. You are not pretending very hard. That nearly made her smile. A few minutes later, Elias appeared in the doorway. He had the Denver letter no longer visible, which meant he had placed it somewhere. Good, that was the first answer. He looked around the room. His gaze took in the pay slips, the kitchen records, the rough notes stacked in small piles. His expression did not change, but Ruth saw the pulse move once in his cheek. "What is this?" he asked. Ruth did not stand. "Corrections." "Corrections to what?" "Wages." His eyes moved to Jonah, then back to her. "You seem determined to misunderstand the limits of your work." "No, I finally understand the size of it." Elias stepped inside. "You have no authority to gather private material from ranch hands. Private material freely given by the men it concerns is not yours to forbid. They are employees. They are people." He smiled then, a thin, unpleasant smile. "How stirring." Ruth opened Abel's file. Abel Cross was shorted 3 days' pay in March, 4 in April, 2 in June, and listed with deductions he was never informed of. Your official book says one thing. His pay slips say another. The kitchen book confirms his presence on the missing days. The night duty cuts match the same week. Elias' eyes turned flat. "You have been busy." "Yes." "Too busy, perhaps, to remain accurate." "That is why I cross-check." She slid the page toward him. Elias did not pick it up. "You think a few scraps brought by discontented men can challenge official accounts. I think 14 men with repeated discrepancies can." The number landed. 14. Elias heard it. Jonah heard it. Even outside, where 2 hands had paused near the porch, the number seemed to travel. Ruth continued. "This is only the beginning. By tomorrow I will have a clean summary." "You will have nothing by tomorrow." The words came out before Elias dressed them. There it was. The room cooled. Ruth lifted her eyes. "I beg your pardon." Elias recovered, but not fully. "I mean you will turn all materials over to me for review." "No." His hand closed once at his side. "You enjoy that word." "I find it useful." He leaned toward the desk. "Mrs. Bellamy, there are documents arriving from Denver that will make your position here very difficult. I am giving you one last chance to step away before those papers become part of a formal record." Ruth let the silence stretch. "Documents." "Plural." "From Denver." "Bellamy Land and Loan?" she asked softly. Elias went still. There it was, not large, not dramatic, but enough. He had not expected her to know the name. Jonah shifted near the wall, but Ruth kept her eyes on Elias. His face smoothed again. "I don't know what you mean." "Yes," Ruth said, "you do." For a moment, something old and ugly showed behind his eyes. Then he smiled. "Your husband's family had unfortunate dealings. That is public enough. I would be careful, Mrs. Bellamy, before you drag your dead man's name through new mud." The word struck like a slap. Ruth's hand tightened around her pen until the wood bit her skin. Jonah took one step forward. Ruth lifted one finger from the desk. "Stop." Jonah stopped. Ruth stood slowly. "If Samuel's name is in mud," she said, "it was put there by men with clean cuffs." Elias looked at her for a long moment. Then he turned toward Jonah. "You are always nearby, Reed." Jonah said nothing. "It makes a man wonder why." Ruth held her breath. Elias studied him, and Ruth could see his mind working, pulling together every moment Jonah had been present, every time he had stood too still, every time men had listened when he spoke. Then Elias looked back at Ruth. "By morning," he said, "you will regret making this public." "By morning," Ruth said, "I expect we both will know more than we do now." He left. But he left too quickly. That was how Ruth knew the plan had worked. The Denver letter was not on him. The threat had pushed him. The name Bellamy Land and Loan had unsettled him. He would go to wherever he had put the papers and check them, move them, hide them better. And Jonah would follow. As soon as Elias disappeared into the main house, Ruth turned. "Go." Jonah was already at the door. "Stay with Hattie." "I am not a child." "No," he said. "You are the reason he is afraid. That is more dangerous." Then he was gone. Night settled slowly. Ruth moved the people's ledger into 3 parts. One pile stayed visible. One went with Abel to the bunkhouse. One went under Hattie's flour bin, not perfect hiding places, but scattered truth was harder to burn. If you have ever seen a quiet person finally gather the courage to speak, tell me in the comments. Would you have trusted the ranch hands' scraps over the official books? At 10 o'clock, Hattie came to Ruth's room carrying tea. "You won't sleep," she said. "No." "Drink anyway. Gives your hands something decent to do besides shake." Ruth accepted it. They sat in the small room without lighting more than 1 candle. Hattie took the chair. Ruth sat on the bed with Samuel's shawl folded at her feet, though her mind kept returning to the spring house, to the Bible hidden under stone, to Miriam's letter. After a while Hattie spoke. "Miriam asked about Bellamy too." Ruth looked up. "She did. Few days before she vanished. Asked if I ever heard that name from Elias. I told her no." Hattie rubbed her thumb along the cup handle. "But I had." Ruth's body went still. "When?" "Winter before. Elias had a visitor from Denver. Big man, fine gloves, mean eyes. They argued in the pantry because men always think kitchens don't have ears." "What did he say?" Hattie closed her eyes, remembering. "He said, the Bellamy file is buried. Keep it that way or Denver burns with you." Ruth's heart slammed once. "The Bellamy file. Did you hear his name?" Hattie opened her eyes. "No, but I saw his hand." "His hand?" "2 fingers missing on the left." Before Ruth could answer, a soft knock came at the window. Both women froze. Then Jonah's voice whispered from outside. "Ruth." She crossed to the window and lifted it. Jonah stood in the dark, breathing hard, one sleeve torn, his face pale with dust. "I found where Elias hid the Denver papers," he said. Ruth's pulse leapt. "Where?" "In the chapel strongbox." "The ranch chapel?" "Yes." "Did you get them?" Jonah's face tightened. "No." "Why not?" He looked past her toward the main house. "Because Elias wasn't hiding them from us." Ruth felt the room grow cold. "He was leaving them for someone." Hattie stood. "For who?" Jonah looked at Ruth. "A rider came through the north gate 20 minutes ago. Big man, fine gloves." Ruth's fingers went numb around the window frame. Jonah's voice dropped. "Missing 2 fingers on his left hand." The room seemed to lose its air. Ruth stood at the open window, with Jonah's words still hanging in the dark. "Missing 2 fingers on his left hand." Hattie's teacup trembled once against its saucer. She set it down before it could betray her further. "Lord help us," she whispered. "He came back." Ruth turned from the window. "You know him." Hattie looked older in the candlelight than she had a moment before. "I never knew his name, but I know the shape of a man who leaves fear behind him." Jonah braced one hand against the window frame. His breathing was still rough, but his eyes were clear. He rode to the old chapel. Elias met him there. They're inside now. Ruth reached for her shawl. Jonah's hand lifted. "No." She looked at him. He did not soften it. "No, Ruth, not this time." "This time." "You have walked into enough rooms with wolves. And you have spent 3 years watching one from the fence line." That hit him, she saw it, but he did not step away from the window. "You're right," he said, "and that is exactly why I know this is different. Elias threatens with paper. That man from Denver does not." Hattie crossed the room and closed Ruth's hand around the shawl before Ruth could put it on. "Listen to him." Ruth looked at her, surprised. Hattie's voice dropped. Miriam did not fear Elias first. She feared the other one. After he came, she stopped sleeping, hid scraps in flour, put her comb in that box like she was packing for a grave instead of a journey. Ruth's anger paused. Not vanished. Paused. Jonah leaned closer to the window. "I saw the Denver man hand Elias a packet. Elias opened the chapel strongbox, placed something inside, then the two of them argued. I got close enough to hear one sentence." "What sentence?" Jonah's face was grim. "The widow has the scent now." Ruth's skin went cold. Hattie made a small sound behind her. Jonah continued. "Then the Denver man said if Elias did not end this tonight, he would." For once, Ruth had no quick answer. The candle hissed. Outside, the ranch lay under thick clouds. No stars, no moon, just lanterns throwing weak yellow circles against the dark. The chapel stood beyond the north pasture, small and whitewashed, built years ago by Jonah's father for Sunday preaching and winter burials. Ruth had seen it from a distance on her first morning, a harmless place. Now it held the Denver papers. Maybe the Bellamy file. Maybe the truth about Silas and Samuel. Maybe the reason Miriam Vale never reached town. Ruth looked toward the door. "I am not running." "Nobody asked you to run," Jonah said. "I am asking you to live long enough to finish." That sentence quieted the room. There was fear in it, but not the weak kind. It was the fear of a man who had already lost too much ground to hidden men and did not intend to lose her to the same darkness. Ruth lowered the shawl. "What do you propose?" Jonah looked relieved for half a second, then serious again. "We wake Abel and Pete, quietly. We send one man to the South Road for Sheriff Daniel Pike, not the deputy in town, Pike himself." "Will he come?" "He will for me." Ruth studied him. "Because you are Jonah Ashford." "Yes." It still felt strange hearing the truth so plainly after all his half-answers. "And the chapel. I go back and watch it." "No." "Ruth." "No more alone work," she said. "That is how Elias survived. He split people, frightened them one by one, accused them one by one, sent them away one by one. We do not answer that by becoming scattered." Hattie nodded hard. "She's right." Jonah exhaled through his nose, not happy but listening. Ruth stepped closer to the window. "We gather witnesses, not a crowd, a careful few. Abel, Hattie, Pete if he can keep steady, you, me." Jonah opened his mouth. Ruth raised a finger. "If you say no again only because I am a woman, I will climb through this window and go without you." Hattie muttered she will. Jonah looked between them. Even in the dark, Ruth saw the reluctant surrender in his face. "Fine," he said, "but you stay behind me." "I will stay where sense puts me." "That is not a promise." "It is the best one available." Despite the danger, something almost human passed over his face, a tired, brief warmth. Then it was gone. Hattie went awake Abel through the kitchen passage. Jonah slipped away toward the bunkhouse for Pete. Ruth stood alone for 1 minute in the room and let herself feel the weight of the night. Not too much. Only enough to understand it. Her husband's name had been dragged through lies before she ever knew the first lie existed. His father had been broken by men who still had paperwork hidden in chapel boxes. Miriam Vale had seen the trail and vanished from it. Elias had burned Ruth's case and smiled while doing it. And now, the man behind the older wound had ridden onto Silver Creek Ranch under the cover of night. Ruth crossed to the washstand, dipped her fingers in cold water, and touched them to her face. "Steady," she whispered. It was not a prayer. It was an order. They gathered behind the cookhouse 5 minutes later. Jonah carried no visible weapon, but Ruth knew better now than to assume that meant he was unprepared. Abel held a lantern with the flame turned low. Pete looked pale but determined, his young jaw clenched hard enough to hurt. Hattie had changed into a dark shawl and carried a flour sack. Ruth looked at it. "What is in the sack?" "Cast iron skillet," Hattie said. Pete blinked. "For protection." "For balance," Hattie snapped. "Protection is what I'll call it if needed." No one argued. They moved toward the chapel by the long way, circling behind the smokehouse and along the dry wash where brush hid them from the main house. The ground dipped and rose beneath Ruth's boots. Twice her skirt caught on mesquite thorns. Jonah slowed each time, though he did not touch her unless she reached for balance. At the ridge above the chapel, they stopped. A lamp burned inside. 2 horses stood tied near the side wall. One was Elias Bay. The other was a black gelding with a Denver saddle and silver studs that caught what little light there was. Voices carried through the thin chapel wall. "Elias first. You said the Bellamy file was dead." A deeper voice answered, calm, heavy. "It was dead until the widow came." Ruth's breath locked. Jonah shifted beside her. The Denver man continued. "Silas Bellamy kept copies. His son must have found some. That is why we moved early on Samuel. Your banker did his part, but the widow started asking after the recall." Ruth closed one hand around a clump of dry grass. The banker. The Denver banker who had stood at Samuel's grave and bowed his head. The world tilted, then righted itself. Elias spoke lower. "She has no proof." "She has Miriam's trail. That is proof enough if she follows it." "Miriam is gone." A pause. Then the Denver man said, "She was supposed to be gone cleaner than she was." Hattie's hand flew to her mouth. Pete looked sick. Jonah's face became stone. Ruth stared at the chapel wall. The words had not explained everything, but they had opened enough of the darkness for her to see the shape inside. Miriam had not run. Not freely. Not safely. And Elias knew. Abel leaned close to Jonah and whispered, "We need Pike." Jonah nodded, but Ruth touched his sleeve. "Wait." Inside, paper rustled. The Denver man spoke again. "You will sign the transfer tonight. Silver Creek's north parcel goes to Bellamy Land and Loan as settlement for the old obligation. Once filed, Ashford cannot contest without opening his father's records. He won't do that." Jonah's breath changed. Ruth looked at him. "What old obligation?" He did not answer. The voice inside continued. "You keep your position. I keep the Bellamy file buried. The widow leaves or disappears into a story no one wants to question, same as Miriam." Ruth's blood went cold, then clear. There was the plan. Not a threat floating in darkness anymore. A plan with paper, land, silence, and a woman removed from the record. Elias' voice came, strained now. "And if Ashford finds out?" The Denver man laughed once. "That boy has hidden in work, clothes so long he has forgotten how to be an owner." Jonah flinched. It was small, but Ruth saw it. Something in her chest tightened, not with fear now, but with fierce understanding. Elias had not only stolen from workers. The Denver man had not only trapped Samuel. They had found the tender places in men and pressed until they bent. Samuel's trust, Silas's records, Jonah's shame, Miriam's isolation, Ruth's widowhood. They made weapons out of wounds. Ruth would not let them use Jonah's. She leaned close to his ear. You have not forgotten. His eyes flicked to her. You are standing right here. That was all she said. It was enough. Inside the chapel, a chair scraped. Jonah straightened. We need witnesses inside before they destroy that file. How? Abel whispered. Ruth looked at the chapel bell rope, hanging outside near the little side window. The bell had not rung since she arrived. Pete, she whispered, run to the bunkhouse, wake everyone, tell them fire near the chapel, not in the chapel, near it, make them come with buckets. Pete's eyes widened. There ain't fire. There will be light enough. Hattie's face changed. Then she opened her flour sack and pulled out not only the skillet, but a small tin of lamp oil. Ruth stared at her. Hattie shrugged. I cook, I prepare. Jonah looked at Ruth like he wanted to object and knew better. Ruth pointed to the bare dirt patch 20 yards from the chapel. Oil on brush, small flame, no building, no horses, nothing that can spread. Abel nodded. Smoke brings men fast. And the bell? Hattie asked. Ruth looked at Jonah. You ring it. He understood. If Ruth rang the bell, Elias might call her hysterical. If Abel rang it, Elias might call him drunk. If Jonah Ashford rang it, once the truth of his name was spoken, the ranch would answer. Jonah looked toward the chapel. Then he moved. Hattie and Abel set the small fire in the dirt patch, controlled and low, just enough to smoke. Pete ran for the bunkhouse. Ruth slipped down behind Jonah toward the bell rope. Inside, Elias said, give me the papers. The Denver man answered, after you sign. Ruth reached the side of the chapel as Jonah grabbed the rope. He paused once. For 3 years, he had hidden behind a hired hand's name. For 3 years, he had listened instead of commanded. For 3 years, Elias and men like him had mistaken patience for weakness. Ruth saw Jonah's hand tighten. Then he pulled. The chapel bell cracked the night open. Once. Twice. Again. The sound rolled across Silver Creek Ranch like judgment waking from sleep. Inside the chapel, a chair crashed. Elias shouted, what was that? Jonah stepped to the chapel door and threw it open. Lamplight spilled over him. Elias stood beside the strongbox with a pen in his hand. The Denver man turned. He was broad, well-dressed, with a beard trimmed close and 2 missing fingers on his left hand. Jonah stepped inside. Ruth followed at his shoulder. The Denver man looked Jonah up and down. Who the devil are you? Outside, voices were rising, men running, buckets clanging, Hattie shouting about smoke like the wrath of God had found the weeds. Jonah removed his hat. My name, he said calm and clear, is Jonah Reed Ashford. Elias went white. The Denver man's eyes narrowed. Jonah looked at the open strongbox, the unsigned transfer, and the packet of Denver papers tied in black string. And this, he said, is my chapel, my land, and my witness to whatever lie you were trying to bury tonight. For a moment, nobody in the chapel moved. The bell still trembled above them, its last sound fading into the night. Smoke drifted past the open door in pale ribbons. Outside, ranch hands were running with buckets, shouting over one another, boots striking hard dirt, lanterns swinging wildly in the dark. But inside the chapel, the quiet was worse than the noise. Elias Voss stared at Jonah, as if the man in front of him had risen from a grave. Jonah Reed Ashford. The name had landed like a hammer on glass. Ruth stood beside Jonah, close enough to see the dust on his sleeve, close enough to hear how steady his breathing had become. Not calm exactly, chosen. The calm of a man who had finally stepped out from behind his own shadow. The Denver man recovered first. He looked Jonah over with cold interest. From the patched coat to the worn boots to the face that no longer belonged to a hired hand. "Ashford," he said, "well, that does make tonight more interesting." Elias found his voice. "Mr. Ashford," he said quickly, too quickly, "this is not what it appears to be." Jonah looked at him. "I have spent 3 years listening to you say that in different ways." Elias swallowed. The Denver man gave a short laugh. 3 years in costume. Your father would have been ashamed." Ruth felt Jonah go still beside her. The words were aimed carefully, not at his pride, deeper, at the old wound beneath it. Jonah did not answer at once. Then he said, "My father taught me land listens longer than men talk. I reckon I learned that part well enough." Ruth saw the Denver man's eyes narrow. He had thrown a blade and found it did not cut as easily as before. Behind them, Abel Cross stepped into the chapel doorway with a lantern in one hand and a bucket in the other. Hattie followed, breathing hard, skillet still tucked under her arm. Pete came next, pale but wide-eyed. More men gathered outside, crowding near the steps. Elias looked past Ruth and saw them. All of them. The same men whose wages had been shortened. The same men he had called confused, unreliable, fortunate to work at all. The men whose silence had kept his office clean. Now they stood in the chapel yard, covered in smoke and night dust, watching. Witnessed. Ruth thought of the word from the hallway. It had become larger than any of them. Jonah pointed to the strongbox. "Open it fully." The Denver man smiled. "You may own this little chapel, Mr. Ashford, but you do not give orders to me." "No," Jonah said, "but I give orders on Silver Creek land." The Denver man's face hardened. Elias raised both hands slightly, trying to smooth the room back into shape. "Let us be sensible. Mr. Ashford, you have been misled by an employee with personal grief. Mrs. Bellamy has every reason to see ghosts in ordinary records." Ruth stepped forward before Jonah could speak. "My grief has better eyesight than your honesty." A low murmur moved through the men outside. Elias' jaw tightened. Ruth turned to them, not dramatically, not like a preacher, but like a woman tired of private truth. "This man told me I was confused. He told Miriam Vale was confused. He told workers their wages were remembered wrong. He told records were mistaken when records proved theft. Every time a truth threatened him, he did not answer it. He questioned the person holding it." The men listened. Even the Denver man listened, though his face showed contempt. Ruth looked back at Elias. "So tonight, we do not ask whether I am grieving. We do not ask whether Abel is discontent. We do not ask whether Pete is young, or Hattie is old, or Jonah has hidden too long in work clothes. We ask what is in that box." The chapel held still. Jonah reached toward the strongbox. The Denver man moved first, placing his left hand over the packet tied in black string. The missing fingers made the gesture look broken and cruel. "That packet contains private business records." Ruth looked at his hand. "Private records tend not to travel by midnight courier to a chapel strongbox." He turned his eyes on her. "And widows tend not to live long when they mistake stubbornness for wisdom." Every man outside heard it. The threat did not hide itself this time. Abel Cross stepped fully into the chapel. "You want to say that again, with all of us listening?" The Denver man looked at him like he was furniture. "Move aside." Abel did not. Pete came to stand beside him, then Levi Boone, then 2 more hands Ruth knew only by face. No one raised a weapon. No one shouted. They simply filled the chapel doorway with bodies that had worked this land and had finally decided their fear did not get the last word. Hattie lifted the skillet slightly. "Plenty of room for truth in here," she said. Less room for manners. Jonah kept his eyes on the Denver man. Your name? The man smiled faintly. August Mallory. Ruth felt Hattie stiffen. That was the name fear had forgotten, but the body remembered. August Mallory, Denver financier, the man behind Bellamy Land and Loan, the man with fine gloves and 2 missing fingers, the man Miriam had feared more than Elias. Jonah nodded once, as if filing the name where it belonged. Mr. Mallory, remove your hand from the packet. Mallory did not. Instead, he looked at Elias. Tell them. Elias looked confused. Mallory's voice sharpened. Tell them what Ashford's father owed. The chapel changed again. Jonah's face tightened. Elias licked his lips. The smooth manager had begun to come apart under too many watching eyes. Jonah, Ruth said softly. He did not look at her. I know some of it, he said. Say it. Elias took a breath. Your father borrowed heavily after the winter losses of '78. He pledged the north parcel as collateral through a private extension arranged in Denver. That debt was settled, Jonah said. Mallory smiled. Was it? Ruth's mind raced. The north parcel, the chapel strongbox, the unsigned transfer, Bellamy Land and Loan, Silas Bellamy. Mallory tapped the packet. Your father settled with one office. He did not settle with the holder of the transferred note. Ruth looked sharply at him. Transferred by whom? Mallory's eyes slid to her. Careful. No, Ruth said. You used Bellamy Land and Loan as a shell after Silas Bellamy lost his company. You moved old notes through a dead name and called them valid. The first real flicker crossed Mallory's face. Ruth saw it. So did Jonah. So did Elias, who now looked like a man realizing the person he served might let him drown first. Ruth pressed harder. Silas discovered it. Mallory's mouth set. Silas Bellamy was a poor record keeper. My husband was not, Ruth said, and Miriam Vale was not. At Miriam's name, Hattie's eyes filled, but she kept her chin high. Ruth pointed to the packet. That file proves the Bellamy name was used after Silas lost control of it. It proves Samuel's loan recall was arranged because he had found something. It proves the North Parcel claim is false. Mallory's expression turned cold enough to quiet the room. You have a talent for building castles from scraps. And you have a habit of hiding foundations. Jonah stepped to the strongbox. This time, when Mallory did not move, Abel and Levi came forward. Mallory looked at them, then at the crowd outside, then at the smoking brush beyond the chapel. He calculated the way Elias calculated, but unlike Elias, he had no local charm to spend. These men did not know him, did not need him, and had just heard him threaten a widow. Slowly, he lifted his hand. Jonah took the packet. Ruth felt her own breath stop as he placed it on the chapel bench. The black string was tied tight. Jonah did not open it. He handed it to Ruth. That single gesture moved through the room more deeply than if he had shouted. The owner of Silver Creek Ranch placed the hidden file in the widow's hands because she was the one who knew how to read its truth. Ruth untied the string. Inside were loan documents, correspondence, transfer notes, and a brittle folder marked Bellamy Land and Loan, Denver office. Her fingers found Samuel's name first. Then Silas. Then Jonah's father, Edward Ashford. 3 families, 1 net. Ruth scanned fast, her eyes trained by years of grief and numbers. There it was. A transfer of note, dated after Bellamy Land and Loan, had legally dissolved. A signature attributed to Silas Bellamy 6 months after his death. Ruth's throat tightened. She lifted the page. This is forged. Mallory gave no answer. Ruth turned the page toward the room. Silas Bellamy could not sign this. He was dead. A deep murmur rolled through the doorway. Elias closed his eyes briefly. That small motion condemned him more than words. Ruth found Samuel's file next. Her husband's loan recall had been pushed through under the authority of that forged transfer chain. The same false shell. The same hidden hand. Samuel had not failed because he had borrowed badly. He had been squeezed because he stood near a secret powerful men wanted buried. Her eyes burned, but she did not cry. Not yet. She looked at Mallory. You stole my husband's land with a dead man's signature. Mallory looked bored, but his voice was tighter. Your husband signed what he signed. Under false authority. He should have hired better counsel. Ruth stepped closer. He died believing he had failed. Something in her voice made the men outside go still. He died apologizing to me for losing land that had been stolen through a lie. He died carrying shame that belonged to you. For the first time, Mallory did not answer. Not because he felt remorse. Ruth did not grant him that. He stayed silent because there were too many witnesses and no clean sentence left to say. Elias suddenly moved. Not toward the door. Toward the side window. Jonah caught him by the arm before he had gone 2 steps. Elias tried to pull free. Let go. Jonah did not tighten his grip. He did not need to. You burned her case, Jonah said. Elias' face twisted. She had stolen records. You threatened her. She interfered with ranch operations. You knew Miriam did not leave freely. The chapel went deathly quiet. Elias stopped struggling. Hattie made a broken sound. Ruth turned slowly. Jonah's voice was low. Answer. Elias looked at Mallory. Mallory looked back at him with flat warning. And there in that look, Elias understood his true position. Not partner, not protected friend, tool, a man useful until he became costly. Elias' shoulders sagged almost imperceptibly. I did not harm Miriam, he said. Hattie whispered, but. Elias looked toward the floor. But I knew Mallory's men took her from the North Road. The words broke something open. Hattie sat heavily on the nearest bench. Pete removed his hat. Abel muttered a curse under his breath, then looked ashamed for saying it in a chapel. Ruth gripped the Bellamy file. Where did they take her? Elias shook his head. I do not know. Mallory laughed softly. Wrong choice. Every face turned toward him. He looked around the chapel and finally seemed to understand that the room had shifted beyond his reach. Then hoofbeats sounded outside. Vast. More than one horse. Men turned toward the chapel yard. Jonah stepped to the door. A rider shouted through the smoke. Sheriff Pike. Relief moved through the men, but Ruth did not let herself feel it yet. Not fully. Not while Mallory stood inside with his fine coat and dead signatures. Sheriff Daniel Pike entered with 2 deputies behind him, dust on his coat and sleep still in the lines of his face. But his eyes were awake enough. Very awake. He looked from Jonah to Elias, from Elias to Mallory, then to the open packet in Ruth's hands. Somebody better start talking, Pike said. Ruth stepped forward. No, she said. The sheriff looked at her. Beg pardon. Ruth held up the forged Silas Bellamy transfer. Somebody better start reading. Jonah's eyes moved to her with quiet pride. The sheriff took the paper, read, then read again. His face changed. Mallory's confidence did not disappear, but it lost its shine. Pike looked at the deputies. Nobody leaves. Elias sat down on the chapel bench, as if his legs no longer trusted him. Mallory remained standing. Ruth turned to Jonah. His face was pale but steady. "You were right," she said softly. "About what?" "This was your chapel." She looked at the Bellamy file, at the gathered hands, at Hattie wiping her eyes with angry fingers, at the sheriff holding a dead man's forged signature under lamplight. "And now it is hers too," Ruth said. "Miriam's?" Jonah asked. Ruth nodded. "And Samuel S. and Silas's, and every man they paid short because they thought tired people could not keep records." Outside, the small brush fire had burned down to smoke. Dawn was still hours away, but the night no longer felt endless. Sheriff Pike began questioning Elias first. Elias answered like a man trying to save scraps from a house already collapsed. Then Pike turned to Mallory. Mallory smiled one last thin smile. "You do realize," he said, "that paper can be challenged." Ruth looked at him. "Yes." She placed Abel's pay slips on the bench, then Hattie's kitchen records, then Miriam's letter, then Samuel's file, then the forged Sila's transfer. "But paper can also gather friends." The sheriff glanced at the growing stack. "So did the ranch hands. So did Jonah." For the first time in years, the truth was not alone. And neither was Ruth. By the time the deputies escorted Elias and Mallory from the chapel, the eastern edge of the sky had begun to pale. Ruth stood outside in the smoke-cold air, holding Samuel's Bible against her chest. Jonah stood beside her, his hat in his hands. No one spoke for a while. Then Hattie came down the steps carrying Miriam's blue-flowered comb. "I brought it," she said, her voice rough. Figured she deserved to be here when he said it. Ruth took the comb gently. The little painted flowers were faded, but still there. A small thing. A woman's thing. The kind of thing men like Elias thought did not matter. Ruth closed her fingers around it. "It matters," she said. Jonah looked toward the north parcel, where the old chapel stood against the paling sky. "Yes," he said, "it does." Ruth looked at him then, truly looked at him. Not the ranch hand, not only the owner, the man who had hidden too long but had finally stepped forward when it counted, the man whose shame had not hardened into cruelty, the man who had placed the truth in her hands in front of everyone. "You have more to do," she said. "I know." "The workers." "Yes." "The land." "Yes." "Miriam." His face tightened. "Yes." "And Samuel." Jonah turned to her. Ruth's voice softened but did not break. "I want his name cleared in Denver, not just here, not just among men who already believe me, on paper, in record." Jonah nodded. "Then that is what we will do." "We." The words settled between them like the first honest light. Behind them, the sheriff's riders moved down the road with Elias and Mallory in custody. Ahead of them, Silver Creek Ranch woke slowly into a changed morning. But Ruth knew one thing clearly. Exposing the lie was not the ending. It was only the door. And beyond, it waited the harder work of repairing every life those lies had touched. By full sunrise, Silver Creek Ranch looked almost ordinary again. That was the strange cruelty of mornings. They came whether a night had broken a life open or not. Light still touched the barn roof, horses still nosed at hay, coffee still boiled in the cookhouse, men still pulled on boots and reached for work gloves with sore fingers. But nothing was ordinary. Not anymore. Ruth Bellamy stood outside the chapel with Miriam Vale's blue-flowered comb in one hand and Samuel's Bible in the other. The small brush fire had gone out. Only gray smoke curled from the blackened patch of dirt where Hattie had made her holy mischief. Down the road, Sheriff Pike and his deputies had already taken Elias Voss and August Mallory toward town. Elias had not looked back. Mallory had looked back once, but not at Jonah, not at the sheriff, not at the gathered hands. He had looked at Ruth. There had been no apology in his face. Only calculation. Ruth knew men like him never truly believed they had lost until a judge said it, a banker recorded it, and every paper they once bent turned against them. So she did not feel victory. Not yet. She felt work. Jonah Ashford stood a few steps away, speaking quietly with Abel Cross and Pete Larkin. His hat was in his hands. His patched coat was torn at the sleeve. In the thin dawn light, he looked nothing like the grand owner Elias had feared, and nothing like the helpless hired hand Mallory had mocked. He looked like a man, finally standing inside his own name. Ruth watched him for a moment, then turned toward Hattie. The older woman sat on the chapel step, both hands wrapped around an empty cup someone had brought her. Her shotgun was nowhere in sight, and Ruth suspected the skillet had been returned to its proper place with quiet pride. "Hattie," Ruth said softly. The cook looked up. Ruth held out Miriam's comb. Hattie stared at it, and the hard lines of her face trembled. "I kept thinking," Hattie whispered, "if I didn't touch it, then maybe I didn't know. Foolish, ain't it?" "No," Ruth said, frightened. Hattie took the comb. For a long moment, she held it like something alive. "She had pretty hair," Hattie said, "always pinned neat, even when she was tired. Said if a woman had to face a hard day, she could at least make her hair mind her." Ruth sat beside her. "Did she have family?" "A brother near Pueblo came once, asked questions. Elias sent him away with lies." Hattie's mouth tightened. "We should write him." "We will." The words came easily. "We." It had become the shape of the morning. By noon, Sheriff Pike returned with 2 more men from town and sealed the ranch office. Not because Ruth's work was doubted, but because it now mattered in court. Marcus Hale, Jonah's lawyer from Colorado Springs, arrived near evening with dust on his coat, sharp eyes, and a leather case full of blank affidavits. He read through Ruth's first summary in the office, while Jonah stood by the window. After 10 minutes, Hale looked up. "You built this from burned notes, worker scraps, kitchen orders, and hidden letters." Ruth sat straight. "I built it from what survived." Hale looked at Jonah. "She may be the most dangerous accountant in the territory." Ruth did not smile. "Only to men who rely on poor arithmetic." Hale let out a short laugh, then he became serious again. "The wage claims are strong. The false supply bills are strong. The land transfer attempt is worse for them because Mallory was present with papers in hand. The Bellamy file will take longer." Ruth's fingers tightened around Samuel's Bible. "How long?" "Long enough to hurt." Jonah turned from the window. "Then we stay with it." Hale nodded. "I expected you would." The next weeks did not move like a story told around a fire. They moved like real justice moves, slowly, with ink, with witnesses, with men trying to deny what they had said until 3 other people swore they heard it, with lawyers arguing over dates and signatures, with clerks unlocking old cabinets, with bankers suddenly remembering letters they had once claimed never existed. Ruth worked every day. Not because she was fearless, because she knew fear lost strength when given a task. She sat with Abel and counted 5 years of missing pay. She sat with Pete and read his mother's letters, each one proving what he had earned and what he had sent home. She sat with Hattie over flower books and coffee orders until the old woman declared that beans had more integrity than half the men in Denver. Jonah kept his promise too. He did not hide again. When the workers gathered in the yard, he stood before them as Jonah Reed Ashford and told them the truth plainly. He told them he owned the ranch. He told them he had suspected Elias. He told them he had hidden as a hand because he wanted truth, but that his patience had cost them wages and peace. No excuse. No polished speech. Just the truth. Then he paid them. Every shorted dollar Ruth could prove. And for the months where records were too damaged or missing, he paid the higher estimate, not the lower one. Abel Cross held his bank draft for a long moment. Could have argued this down, Abel said. Yes, Jonah answered. Why didn't you? Jonah looked across the yard, where Ruth stood with the payroll ledger against her chest. Because the whole trouble began with men taking what they could defend, instead of giving what was right. Abel nodded once. It was not forgiveness. It was the beginning of respect. That was better. Miriam's brother came 3 weeks later. His name was Daniel Vale. He rode in from Pueblo on a tired, dun horse, carrying 5 years of unanswered grief in his face. Hattie met him first and broke down before she finished saying his sister's name. Ruth gave him the comb. Daniel held it in both hands, then sat on the chapel step and wept without shame. No one tried to stop him. Some grief had earned the right to be heard. Sheriff Pike could not give Daniel all the answers. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Elias admitted only that Mallory's men had taken Miriam from the North Road. Mallory denied everything, of course. Men like him hid behind denial the way cowards hid behind locked doors. But Miriam's letter was entered into record. Her name was spoken in court. Her brother heard the truth from living mouths. And on a cool Sunday morning, Jonah had a small marker placed beside the chapel, not as a grave, because they did not have her body, but as a witness. Miriam Vale. Bookkeeper. She saw the truth and did not look away. Hattie placed the blue-flowered comb beneath the marker. Ruth placed one hand on the stone. For a moment, she thought of all the women whose warnings became gossip, whose records became ashes, whose fear was mistaken for weakness until someone finally read what they left behind. If this story reminds you of someone who told the truth before anyone believed them, honor them in the comments. Some names deserve to be spoken again. By winter, the Bellamy case reached Denver. Ruth traveled there with Jonah and Marcus Hale. She wore the same black dress she had arrived in at Silver Creek, but now the hem was clean, the collar mended, and her posture different. Not softer, not harder. Freer. The Denver hearing took 2 days. Ruth heard men use careful words for ugly things: improper authority, faulty transfer, questionable signature, procedural irregularity. She stood when called and gave those words their real names. Forgery, fraud, pressure, theft. She spoke Samuel's name clearly. She spoke Silas Bellamy's name clearly. She placed Miriam Vale's letter into the record. She identified the false transfer signed after Silas's death. She answered every question without ornament and without apology. When Mallory's lawyer asked whether grief might have affected her judgment, Ruth looked at him for a long, quiet moment. Yes, she said. A stir moved through the room. Then she continued. Grief made me careful. It taught me what lies cost. It taught me to read every line twice and trust no man who profits from my confusion. The room went still. The judge did not smile, but his pen stopped moving for 1 full second. That was enough. The ruling did not bring Samuel back. Nothing could. But it cleared the false authority behind the loan recall. It restored Samuel Bellamy's name in the land records. It exposed Bellamy land and loan as a stolen shell used by August Mallory to move bad debt and stolen claims through dead men's signatures. Ruth sat in the courthouse after the ruling with the papers in her lap. Jonah sat beside her. For a while neither spoke. Outside, Denver wagons rattled over stone streets. Somewhere a church bell rang the hour. Life went on, loud and busy and careless. Ruth touched Samuel's Bible. "He did not fail," she said. Jonah's voice was gentle. "No. He thought he did." "I know." Ruth closed her eyes. For 2 years, Samuel's last apology had lived inside her like a splinter. "I'm sorry, Ruth. I should have been wiser." She had told him then there was nothing to forgive, but part of him had died before his body did, crushed beneath shame that was never his. Now, at last, the lie had been lifted from his grave. A tear slipped down her cheek. This time, she did not wipe it away quickly. Jonah said nothing. He only sat beside her, steady as fence posts set deep. When they returned to Silver Creek Ranch, snow had touched the high ridges. The cottonwoods were bare. The creek ran thin and bright under a skin of ice. The ranch had changed. Not in grand ways, in honest ones. The office shelves were labeled. The ledgers matched the barns. Workers signed their own pay records. Supply receipts were read aloud once a month in the dining room, to much groaning from the men and fierce approval from Hattie. Jonah offered Ruth a permanent position, managing the ranch accounts. She refused. Then she offered a correction. "Not managing the accounts," she said, "managing the business office." Jonah looked at the contract draft. "That is a larger role." "Yes." "You rewrote the terms." "Yes." "You added authority over vendor approval, wage review, and land document storage." "Yes." He looked up, and there was warmth in his eyes. "Anything else?" "I added a clause stating that no manager may prevent workers from bringing account questions directly to the office." Jonah read the clause. Then he signed without changing a word. Later, when the first deep snow came, Jonah took Ruth to the north parcel. The old cabin stood beyond the chapel, tucked under dark pines, its roof bowed but holding. His father had built it with rough hands and young hope. Jonah stood before it for a long time without speaking. Ruth did not hurry him. Some doors had to be opened from the inside. At last, he said, "I thought if I came here, I would only feel what I failed to protect." Ruth looked at the cabin. "And now?" He breathed out slowly. "Now I think maybe it waited." "For what?" "For the truth to reach it." Ruth slipped her hand into his. This time, neither of them pulled away quickly. In spring, they repaired the cabin roof. In summer, they planted wildflowers near Miriam's marker. In autumn, Daniel Vale returned and brought a letter Miriam had written him years before, one he had been too broken to read often. Ruth copied it and placed it with the ranch records, not because it proved a legal point, but because a life was more than the evidence it left behind. And somewhere between those seasons, Ruth stopped wearing black every day. Not because she forgot Samuel. She never would. She stopped because grief had changed rooms inside her heart. It no longer stood in the doorway blocking all light. It sat in a quieter place, honored but not ruling. Jonah never asked her to set it down. That was why, one evening by the creek, she finally did. They were sitting where the water curved around flat stones. The sunset spread gold across the pasture. A horse flicked its tail near the fence. From the cookhouse came Hattie's voice scolding someone for touching pies too early. Ruth looked at Jonah. "You once said you needed me." "I did." "You were wrong." He turned to her. She smiled softly. "You needed the truth. I happened to be stubborn enough to bring it." Jonah's smile came slow. "I stand corrected." "You often will." "I'm beginning to look forward to it." She laughed then. A real laugh. surprised out of her, light enough to startle a bird from the cottonwoods. Jonah watched her like that sound had given him something no land deed ever could. Months later, people told the story many ways. Some said a widow came to Silver Creek Ranch with $9 and uncovered a criminal ring. Some said the quiet cowboy was the owner all along and fooled the thief in his own yard. Some told it as a love story, some as a courtroom tale. Hattie told it best. Ranch was full of lies, she would say, pouring coffee like judgment. Then Ruth Bellamy opened the books and let daylight in. That was the truth of it. Not the whole truth, but the heart. Silver Creek Ranch did not become famous for being the richest spread in Colorado. It became known as the place where wages were fair, records were clean, and no man was too small to be believed when he carried the truth in his hands. As for Ruth, she kept Samuel's Bible on the office shelf beside the new ledgers. Inside it remained Miriam's first hidden page, the one that had started the final unraveling. Not because Ruth needed to look at it often, but because some papers deserved a safe home after surviving so much darkness. Years later, when young clerks came to learn from her, Ruth would tap the ledgers and tell them, "Numbers do not speak loudly. That is why dishonest men think they can bury them. Your work is to listen better than they hide." And sometimes, near sunset, she would walk to the creek where Jonah waited with his hat beside him and his boots in the dirt. Not pretending anymore. Not hiding anymore. Just a man beside the woman who had found the rot beneath his land and helped him dig deep enough to set the posts right. The final image people remembered was not Elias in custody or Mallory in court. It was Ruth Bellamy standing in the Silver Creek office one golden morning, sleeves rolled, pen in hand, sunlight across the page, Samuel's Bible on the shelf, Miriam's name safe in the records, Jonah visible through the window mending a fence that no longer marked stolen land. A widow came west with $9, one Bible, and a grief men thought would make her weak. They were wrong. Her grief made her careful. Her courage made her dangerous. And her truth made Silver Creek Ranch whole again. If this story stayed with you, like and subscribe for more emotional Wild West stories where justice does not always ride in loud, but sometimes walks in quietly, carrying a ledger and refusing to look away.